I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is Scald. What you're about to hear is an installment of an ongoing fantasy narrative that I've written specifically with your ears in mind. With my voice as the only instrument, the only method of delivery, Scald is done in one single, flawless take. Scald is serialized, which means we pick up exactly where we left off last time, so you should probably go back and listen to episodes 1 and 2 first. Your call, though. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is Scald, Part 3. Maul winced, dragging himself down the alleyway. Squinting, his head splitting from the remorseless suns of this forsaken barrier realm, he kept his eye on Rorg, the bent and knotted junkie that had given him his first taste of the divine salve of the mind. The crutch that eases the wise man's burden, the holy plant that he called the anchor. Though it had eased Maul's mind, smoothing the edges of his shattered psyche, that blissful night's sleep he was gifted with did not come without a cost. Now, in the harsh light of day, Maul's entire body ached, crying out in agony with every careful step upon those stained cobblestones. Joints Maul didn't even know he had creaked and cracked as he struggled to fight the debilitating pain and keep up with Rorg as he picked his way through the crowded streets and their pulsing, undulating masses. It wasn't that Rorg was more fit than Maul. In fact, aside from his clenched jaw and the sweat on his brow, Maul looked no less vibrant than before. To the casual observer, he appeared the picture of health, especially when contrasted with Rorg, that knobby, twisted mess of not humanity, but something else, quivering underneath his rancid rags. But Rorg, after many a night spent clutching the anchor as it pulled him down into his slumber, had grown accustomed to the toll it takes on the body. In all things, what's acceptable, it's only a question of what you can stand, and what you can stand is determined solely by what you've stood for. So Rorg, adept in the suffering brought on by the anchor's weight, hopped and scurried with his sideways run as Maul struggled to keep up. After a decade tied to the World Tree, Maul was no stranger to imprisonment, but never before had he been imprisoned inside his own body. Lunging forward, forcing a dawdling merchant out of his way, he reached out and snatched Rorg's rags. Slow down. The anchor gives, and it takes away. To feel it so strongly now, you must have needed it quite badly. What I need is more. Where are you taking me? What is this foul place even called? The two began to move forward once again, a strange pair. The glowering, powerfully built savage leaning on the filthy beggar as if he were a walking staff, one knotted by age and agony. Names are given by those from without. Enough with your riddles, Rorg. What is the city called? As no one ever comes here intentionally, it's never needed a name. When I first came here many years ago, I don't care about your past. Where are you taking me? To the man who can give us what we need. What I need is to be cured of this addiction, the addiction you saddled me with. That is what you want. But what you need is for the aching in your joints to abate, for your troubled mind to quiet its howling, for all your problems to go away just long enough for you to find sustenance, maybe a little pleasure, if you're lucky, before tying the anchor around your neck once again. Though he didn't have the words to describe it, Maul was horrified and disgusted by Rorg's acceptance of their plight, the indifference he had to a fate worse than death and its inky black void of nothingness. Was he not a warrior? Where was his pride, his righteous rage, the drive to free himself and better his place in this short, brutish life, to get what he wanted, to take what he deserved? Instead of that pride, that rage, that drive, in Rorg, Maul saw only servitude. And a man bound by his circumstances, but shackled by his fatalism. You talk like a slave, because that's what we are. Slaves to the world, moored and grounded by the anchor. Bite your tongue, you beast. You speak not to a slave, but to a king. Before Rourke could respond, and before Maul's anger could boil fully over, scorching the both of them, a sardonic laugh cut through the urban din of that nameless city. A king? Who have you brought me now, Rourke? I apologize if I'm dressed inappropriately. A moment before, Maul saw only shadow in that dingy, ignored corner of the city's labyrinthine outdoor market. But with his broken mind beginning to weaken and his body screaming as the effects and after effects of the anchor began to wear off and intensify, he couldn't have sworn to it, especially as he watched the thin, pitch-black, spider-like creature unfold himself from the darkness. Please, Gradoon, we've come to do business. Gradoon laughed, flashing teeth made whiter by their incongruous position inside that dark, fur-covered head. Maul eyed the drug dealer suspiciously, hoping to utilize the insight and warrior's intuition that had clearly failed him when sizing up Rourke and his intentions. The parts of Gradoon's body not covered by his inky black jerkin and breeches were instead coated with the same thick, short hair found on his head and face. Unlike a cat's luxurious fur that reflects the light with a pleasing sheen, Gradoon's body seemed to swallow the light whole, receding from sight within even a second of inactivity. But Rourke, how can we do business when you have nothing to offer me? Rourke spoke with as much force as he could muster. We have money, and we won't be cheated, Gradoon. But his words were as easy to see through as the holes in the rags he clutched to his knotted body. Gradoon moved slowly around Rourke and Maul, corralling them back into the dark corner from which he had emerged. Maul struggled to keep an eye on the shifting, agile black form of Gradoon as his hand went instinctively to his cudgel. I do see now. I certainly do. I see you've come to do business, and I see your king. And I see him going for that crude weapon by his side. But I also see this. He's an addict, the same as you. It's very difficult to do business with addicts, you see, without a common frame of reference, without an agreed-upon set of standards, without a notion of value. How can anyone strike a deal? How can anyone agree to anything? Maul, mustering every ounce of strength left in his screaming body, stepped into Gradoon's path and grunted the only deal he knew to offer. Take his gold, or I take your life. Either way, I take the anchor. Gradoon laughed, skipping back into the darkness, his teeth and shining red eyes visible, but the rest of his body shifting, merging with the darkness, flashing into vision for a brief moment before receding back once again. Rourke must have told you so little about me, but why would he bother telling a lackey anything? A lackey? I am yes, a king, of course I know, a king, but even your royal decree, your highness, can't make anchor appear where there is none. Maul, furious, furrowing his brow in frustration and pain, whirled on Rourke. Deceiver! You told me we could find the anchor here! Gradoon let loose with another sardonic laugh. And you can! But don't think for a second that I'm foolish enough to keep it on me. When you deal with junkies for a living, you learn to take precautions, to keep their standards from intruding upon your own. Maul glowered, choking back his rage. Then he spoke to Rourke, and for the first time the twisted old veteran began to believe Maul's incessant claims of royal blood. He didn't believe because of the anger, malice, and threat of violence that coursed through every syllable. That was there, omnipresent, whenever Maul spoke. Instead, Rourke believed because though Maul's circumstances were dire, though he was cloaked only in rags, stranded in a nameless city in an unknown realm, addicted to a debilitating drug with no relief in sight, despite all of that, the words he spoke contained something far more powerful than mere meaning. Confidence. The money. Rourke quickly turned over everything he owned. 3 meager gold coins, shaved down bit by bit by bit by the unscrupulous money changers of that nameless city. He deposited them into Maul's outstretched hand. Then, whether out of respect, fear, or some potent blend of the two, he stepped back and lowered his head. Maul staggered forward, his body shaking from the pain that racked his limbs, and he offered the coins to Gradoon. Now, the anchor. Maul thought he saw a glimmer of recognition in Gradoon's eyes, an acknowledgement that this gruff, hulking figure was something more than the junkies he typically preyed upon. But if there really was anything there, it was gone in an instant, as Gradoon, stepping forward out of the shadows once again, allowed his face to relax into what must have been its natural state. That snide, knowing sneer. The king, with so very many loyal subjects to keep track of, must not be up to date with current exchange rates. Rorg, I would have expected you to know better, though. But just yesterday, you sold me. That was yesterday, and all the yesterdays are forever lost to us. Now is today, and I couldn't part with a single dose of Anchor, much less a double, for less than, say, 10 gold coins. Maul brandished his cudgel, raising it slowly but with great portent. The menace clear in the gleaming teeth he bared in a dangerous mixture of pain, frustration, desire, and barely contained rage. You cheat! You extortioner! You— Careful, my liege. Careful. Lay hands upon me and deprive yourself not only of my charming company, but of precisely that which you need the most. Maul fought the pain in his mind, the agony in his limbs, and the growing desire to permanently send Gradoon back to the darkness he seemed to be so comfortable within. He turned to Rorg, the confidence surging up again. More gold. I don't. Suddenly Maul's latent royal confidence mixed with something even more frightening. Desperation. More gold. Give it to me, now! I have none. Nothing. I have nothing. Rorg's eyes began to fill with tears. Maul's hand went to his head, squeezing his temples in a vain attempt to force the pieces of his psyche back together as he fell under Gradoon's avaricious gaze. Well, perhaps, my liege, you have something to trade. That club is— No. Maul spat the word, pulled back to the present by the prospect of losing the only thing that kept him whole in the roiling underneath. Well, then I'm afraid you're out of luck, your highness. Return when you've come to your senses, or have lost them completely. Either works. And Gradoon receded fully into the darkness. Maul turned back to Rorg, who was hunched over, weeping, his only confidence in the fact that he would now die of the suffering that Anchor withdrawal brings. Get yourself together. But I don't have anything else. We have nothing, and if you won't sell, then we'll find something to trade. And we'll take it. By the time they made it across the city, staggering through the markets and fighting for space with the hordes of orphans that squabbled for position in the dirt, the realm's twin suns had lowered behind the buildings, filling the streets with dual shadows that played tricks on Maul's eyes, his exhaustion complicit in the ruse. Rorg had wanted to stop and beg along the way, but Maul refused to let him. The Anchor would have to drag him down much further before he resorted to handouts. After ducking into the alley, the two waited. Silently, they allowed anyone who might have seen them come in to move along, or else just forget about the strange, hobbling pair of vagabonds. At Maul's direction, Rorg kept an eye out for anyone who might take note of them, though truthfully, he didn't know why he was looking, or even what they were doing back in that dank, forsaken alley, nestled in amongst the nameless city's most dangerous neighborhood. Whether to keep his plan a secret, or just to conserve his breath on their forced march across the nameless city, Maul had refused to speak a single word beyond hurry. Now it was Maul's turn to hurry, as he didn't know what he would find behind the door, but did know that time was of the essence. His calloused hands scratched at the heavy stone door, searching for purchase and a way to pry it open. Either through luck or the blessing of a god he refused to acknowledge, Maul found a pressure plate. He pushed hard enough to activate the spring, then pulled the door open just wide enough for his broad shoulders to slip through. He called for Roarg in a hoarse whisper. Roarg was tentative, but Maul grabbed him, roughly, forcing him through the doorway. Maul followed, then closed the door as quickly and silently as the burglars they had just become. Surrounded in quiet, pregnant darkness, the two waited, frantically willing their strained eyes to adjust to the darkness. The candles had long burnt out, and the only light came from the faltering rays of the last moments of the day, creeping in through long, narrow slits in the stone walls. Perversions of true windows, just as this was a perversion of a true temple. Roarg began to gag, having grown unaccustomed to the iron-heavy smell of spilt blood, an odor that hung thick in the temple's stale air. "Quiet," Maul mumbled as he started to pick his way across the temple, wary of what, if anything, waited for them in the dark. Roarg followed after Maul, but with his very first step he hit a puddle of some unknown and terrifying ichor. It was partially congealed, but still slick enough on the ancient flagstones to send Roarg careening to the floor, where he came face to face with the caved-in skull, that mangled, gruesome visage of one of his supplicants. Before Roarg's scream could finish welling up in his throat, Maul was upon him, clamping his hand down over the junkie's mouth. Though his body ached, though his mind screamed in agony, Maul still had that animal quickness within him, muscles trained and honed through a decade of constant flexing and exertion. Though it pained him to do so, he sprang across the temple, desperate to keep their presence a secret. "I said, quiet!" Maul hoisted himself back to his feet and made his way across the temple, circumventing his grim handiwork, the broken bodies, the soulless husks of the supplicants who, if allowed, would have subjected him to. Best not to think of it. Roarg clambered to his feet and panicked, whispering, "Maul, this place, it belongs to him. We cannot." "He owes me more than I could take from him in this impoverished realm." Roarg shuffled over to Maul, watching nervously as the determined savage, driven wild by captivity, climbed upon the altar. It was made of stone that carried something of the old world, the world before the sundering, deep within it. Veins of eldritch power ran through the ice-cold, glowing marble. Though he couldn't name it, and even if he couldn't comprehend it, Maul still felt it. And he felt it strongly, coursing up through his bare feet, hopping up his body, digging its frigid fingers into his throbbing joints. Roarg pleaded with him. But if we steal from him, we'll be cursed." Maul stood upon the altar, grasping them in his aching fists, focusing his rage, his anger, his agony, letting it flow into his muscles and ease the pain that made his bones feel as if they were grinding into dust with every single motion. Instead of stepping away from the confusion that clouded his mind, instead of fleeing the ache that plagued his entire body, running from the agony, retreating from the suffering, he embraced it, he leaned into it, he channeled it, he used it, he fed upon it. At birth, a man is cursed with life, and he's cursed again with death. Everything in between is his for the taking. With a crack that echoed and reverberated through the ancient stone of that debauched temple, Maul fell back suddenly, tumbling down from the altar in a thrashing panic. Like all savages, like all men that remain unbroken by the world, Maul fell hard, but began to get back up immediately. He moved slowly, still suffering the effects of the anchor, but something was different when he arose. He had not only a smile on his face, but his golden antlers in his hands. If you enjoyed what you just heard, I hope you'll do me this massive favor. Give Scald a good review on iTunes, Stitcher, or preferably both. This will not only make me feel good about myself, but will also help get the show featured on those platforms, which will bring more people into the happy Scald fold. Also, feel free to come find me on social media. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they're all just Aubrey Sitterson. AubreySitterson. No spaces, no numbers. Or you can head over to AubreySitterson.com, spelled the same way, for links to everything, including social media, my non-Scald related projects, t-shirts, credits, bio, and contact information. Finally, if you're enjoying Scald, please tell your friends, in real life, online, anywhere you can find them. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.